Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today and welcome. We, as always, is going to leave it a couple of minutes for the last minute stragglers to join, and then we will get started. Let's give it one more minute as we were a bit late starting.
Whose fault was that?
I have no idea. At least it means all your passwords are secure if you don't know them off the top of your head. You're not using the same one.
See, there you go.
Security conscious, what I like.
Maybe, we could do today. We could maybe take a poll and see what the temperature is of all the attendees around the world. See if it's actually hotter than in London, where the two of you are.
I don't
Very
think
true.
That'd be exciting, wouldn't it?
We've hit Middle Eastern temperatures.
Yeah, hotter than the Caribbean, I've heard.
Yeah. Oxford Circus was actually on fire earlier this morning. I don't know whether that had anything to do with the heat, but I'm going to go with it. It was.
I didn't see that. I'm going to have to check that out, actually. I didn't know
maybe
that.
It's excuses my team are using to come into work, Nate. So anyway, okay, thank you everyone for joining today. It's been a long time. I feel like it's been a long time since I've done one of these, so it's good to be back. I'm Charlie. I'll be leading the session, and as you have heard already, because I am British and we can't stop talking about the weather, I am coming to you from London on what is the UK's hottest day ever recorded. So I'm very happy to be in an air-conditioned office right now, but please do forgive the slightly melted look. As always, we have an incredibly special session for you, and this one in particular promotes self-determination, and the word innovation gets used quite a lot, but I would say today's session is truly an example of what that word means. But before we get to the meat of the webinar today, let me introduce you to probably someone you know all too well, and that is Mark Ross, founder and GridMarkets genius, who every month brings together the creative community for all of us to enjoy and learn from. And then later on, we have Nell Lloyd-Malcolm, the brain behind xydrobe, who we'll be delving into more detail later. So welcome everyone. Mark, why don't you kick us off and tell us more about GridMarkets?
Thanks for that very flattering and undeserved introduction.
Always. That's what I'm here for.
Unbelievable. Wow. I'm feeling like amazing right now. All right. Hi, I'm Mark. I'm, as Charlie mentioned, one of the founders of GridMarkets, and our job is to accelerate your simulations and renderings. And I'll tell you briefly a little bit about the service we offer. So we support a number of major 3D applications, which you see on the screen here, as well as renders. And we like to think that we empower innovative artists by giving them unlimited rendering potential. The process of getting started is super easy. It takes 2 steps. You should be up and running in a matter of minutes. And then from the 3D software that you're using, you can submit to us directly. So nothing new to learn. And once you are set up, you are able to submit to as many machines as you want. And you can run as many submissions concurrently as you want as well. So it's high throughput. It's a pay per machine usage. We also have a pay by the day. So you can render all you want for the day at a fixed price. You can do that for 1 day or multiple days, depending on what you like. Our platform was built by artists and it's supported by artists. So we help you get over those challenging deadlines. We understand what it means to have that challenging deadline. And we're here to support you 24/7. The platform is very secure. We use a number of major cloud providers, one being Oracle. And so when you submit things to us, they're running on very secure machines. We have a promo for those of you who have joined today's call, 15% discount on our service. Use this promo code here and you'll get that discount. So that's it for me. Back to you, Charlie.
Muted. Thank you, Mark. And don't worry, for those of you who are really keen on using that discount code, we will bring it up later. But now we get to the main event. I want to extend a very warm welcome to Nell Lloyd-Malcolm, co-founder and CEO of xydrobe. Nell started her career in the VFX world, working for some of the industry's biggest names like Framestore and DNEG. And a few years ago, she set off by herself in a whole other market, showing incredible bravery and intelligence, probably, and just amazing knowledge about what she does. But rather than me tell the story, let's start talking to Nell. So, hi, Nell. Welcome.
Hi. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for having me. That was a very generous intro, so thanks.
Well, I think it's a very honest intro. I mean, before we get down into the nitty-gritty, can you tell our listeners who xydrobe are?
Yeah, so we in general, I think the easiest way of describing what we do is we are a visual effects vertical. So we take kind of Hollywood standard practice for visual effects and apply it into the luxury sector. We've mostly been working with luxury fashion brands, but we do also help brands who are in the good space and the beauty space as well. And a visual effects vertical for us looks like we can do anything from consulting creatively through to producing the work, through to installing the work, doing the kind of whole whammy for any of our partners. And I think the main germ of it was kind of bringing that Hollywood standard, really, really high quality visual effects into the luxury goods space.
So I guess let's kind of rewind a little bit as to how you got to this place. As I mentioned in your intro, you came from more of that Hollywood films, TV, crazy VFX world. So can you take us through a little bit how you got here, where you are now?
Yeah. Where do I begin, really? I think I didn't start out in visual effects. I didn't start out in film. I actually started out in fashion, funnily enough, which was a kind of nice crossover for me to where I am now. I left school when I was quite young. I did a very brief stint. The only bit of higher education I've ever done was a foundation course at Leeds, where I did a fashion course, actually. And then I ended up deciding that I didn't want to go to university and I wanted to work instead. So I did a couple of internships, which is funny enough where I met one of my co-founders, Michael. He was my boss back in the day. And actually I met Izzy when I was at Leeds too. So we have all known each other since that kind of period of my life. And then we ultimately, I did that for a few months. I think I was a pretty terrible intern, if I'm completely honest. Michael's got a very funny story about something that I'm not going to go into right now, but I'll save it for maybe later on in the session. But
okay, we'll go back to that later.
And then it was kind of a classic situation of a friend of my sister's was working on set. And they said, do you want to, be someone's assistant? Do you want to get people coffee? I actually got turned down for my original job, and then I reapplied for something else. Turning down for someone to get someone coffee is pretty hardcore. But then the next one I did get eventually, and it turned out that I was working on set with a really talented guy called Matt Rank, who is now in the upper echelons of Netflix, which is amazing. He's had an incredible career, and I was his assistant on set for Star Wars Episode 7. And that kind of pushed me into the motion capture space, which was really, really interesting. Very, very niche, which is something that I guess I'll touch on again later on in the session, but that kind of took me off into a kind of pathway in motion capture, which took me to the Imaginarium, which was really fascinating. It was a really interesting company, still is. And then I got a call one day to say, do you want to work on set for Ready Player One? And so that was sort of something for me. It was a big kind of pivotal moment in my career, because I ended up working in the animation team at the Imaginarium, which was fascinating and I was loving it. But I got the call to do a production job on set, and I decided to do that, which kind of ended up snowballing into me continuing in production. I really, really loved it. I think it was a lot of things that I'm quite good at. So I continue to do that, which is ultimately what led me to go to Framestore, which was my last job before I left xydrobe, which was fascinating actually. So yeah, a brief history, I guess.
A very brief history. So I guess a brief but full. I mean, I'm not taking away that you packed a lot into that. Not a fancy history.
Good.
So I mean, there's also within that there's a varied amount and lots of touch points on different aspects of the effects, from the motion capture to the data capture to Framestore, and working on those very CG heavy shows. What was it then? What was the identifying moment when you're like, oh, I think I want to work for myself. I've got this idea, and I'm done with this part of my time here.
So I'm definitely someone who I think was always destined to set up my own business. I think I was one of those annoying kids that was on the playground trying to earn tuck money or whatever with doing anything. I was, for those who are old enough to remember FIMO, I was selling FIMO things on the playground, which was quite funny. And I think I always wanted to set up my own business. That was ultimately, it was always my end goal to do that. And I think however consciously I was going through my career with that in mind, it was always sort of in the background of whatever I was trying to do. I was always trying to round out any particular kind of specialisms that I might have that would aid me in, needing credibility in a field that would ultimately allow me to set up my own business and convince maybe some people to provide us with some funding. I needed to know what I was talking about. And so whilst I was going through my career, I did always bear that in mind. But I think a big moment for me, it was less about needing to change what I was doing at the time. It was much more that I'd spotted an opportunity that was really exciting. I think for like-minded people out there, you're always kind of looking, and I have this, list, a continuous list on my desktop of ideas, business ideas, and I did at the time. And you would think about some, and I would leave some be for a little period of time, and there are those ideas that you don't leave. And that's always generally what I would do, is if I had an idea that I was sort of excited by, I'd write it down, and maybe if it was still bugging me in a couple of weeks, I would then return to it and think about it some more and see if there's any validation there. And that was one of the ideas, and it was the one that I couldn't really drop. And mostly it was also because it was in a field that I was also really excited by. When I first started, I wanted to be in fashion originally. And so that germ, the opportunity that I'd noticed, I'd spoke to my co-founders about it, who were just a couple of very good friends at the time, who were both incredibly experienced in their fields. They'd both been working in luxury fashion. So I actually called them both up for some advice originally, which was just about saying, look, I've noticed there's a bit of a quality discrepancy in what's currently out there in luxury fashion, luxury goods, which are two very kind of aesthetically driven marketplaces. So the level of digital work didn't really make sense for me. Was it a conscious decision that they were making in terms of what they're producing? So that was sort of mostly why I made that decision, was because not only was it something that was really exciting, we then started to prove the market. I then had two very brilliant co-founders that also had a huge amount of credibility in the area that we were going to be going into. And also I felt like I'd reached a really kind of a sort of perfect moment in my career, in my personal life, which meant that I was lucky enough, privileged enough to be able to decide that I was going to leave my full-time job and go and do this, which, it wasn't a short process. It took, from having our kitchen table moment in sort of January, late January, early February last year. It wasn't until September, really actually early October, that I then quit my full-time job. So it was a lot of time that we spent, I guess some would call it procrastinating. I think a lot of people would just say, I think we all felt like we were being quite wise about making sure we were making the right decision. So yeah.
And before we get into kind of the focused on the company itself, I just want to touch on something you said, just for maybe, which might be quite inspirational for people listening. It's like you mentioned you don't have any higher education. This is something that you've kind of achieved through grit and tenacity, which I think is a huge deal, especially with VFX and those kind of in the CG world, where there's typically been a barrier to entry with higher education, or being able to access it due to being able to have access to the computers and what's needed. So I mean, how did you find yourself impeded by not having that higher education?
I guess it's a good question. I think I did originally. I think, you know, it was never something I was, as soon as I'd done that foundation course at Leeds, I think I knew instantly that, you know, education had always been something that I'd had a somewhat laissez-faire attitude towards, let's put it that way. And I think that the thing that I always recognized in myself was that I'm much more motivated, and this sounds quite crass to say, but I was really motivated by the idea of being financially independent. And so for me, I knew that the number one thing that motivated me in the morning was making my way in my own career and getting to financial goals, which I wasn't going to achieve if I was going to go to uni for the next 3 to 4 years and ultimately put myself in quite a lot of debt. I felt as though if I could actually have a lot of opportunity, if there was an opportunity available to me, and I was lucky enough, you know, I had a parent who has a house in London. And I think that's quite an important thing for me to say, is that yes, you know, whilst there was a lot of grit and tenacity, and that I'll talk about a lot of the things, that the way I approached a lot of the opportunities I was given, but I was really lucky. I was able to do an internship that didn't pay me, because I had a parent that lived in London. I was able to live there for nothing. You know, I was able to, yes, I did work another job. I was working 7 days a week, but that doesn't remove from the fact. So the way that I sort of approached that decision was much more about, okay, I'm really ready. I was just so full of this ambition that I was in no way patient enough to wait for the next 3 to 4 years to actually start going out there and achieving it in some way. And I think that remained throughout my entire career, was a lot of, you know, if there was an opportunity presented to me that allowed me to either further what I was doing at the time, you know, I always took it. That's the number one thing I always say, is that I said yes to basically everything that was presented to me. That meant that, you know, sometimes there were crazy things, but ultimately, if I'd never said yes to, you know, getting someone coffee on set, which, yes, I'm sure a lot of people would think that was amazing because it's Star Wars, but, you know, that's the sort of thing that continued, which I think ultimately led me to where I ended up at Framestore, especially, was, I guess, yeah, it's an opportunity kind of grabber.
Well, to be honest, I think a lot of us can speak to that. We all started getting coffee to someone or other. So
precisely,
it's a good place to start. It's a good place to start.
Precisely. And I think, sorry, I suddenly realized I didn't actually answer your question about the kind of side of it from someone who may not also have higher education. And I think if you're able to supplement your CV, yes, you don't have a degree to speak of, but if you're able to supplement your CV with a similar level of career history from lots of different places, and the number one thing I always did was make sure I got a recommendation from the person that I worked with. So it became second nature at the end of the day. If I was leaving a job, I would ask them to write me a recommendation, which I would supplement my CV with, which was the sort of thing that I'm not sure whether, you know, I think a lot has changed actually in recent history about how much weight a degree carries, but certainly that was something that I found very useful, was making sure that that kind of track record and the way that I'd been applying myself was something that was I wasn't afraid to tell people about, put it that way.
So you mentioned one of the thank you for your honesty as well, but a big motivation was having that financial security and independence. So
yeah,
having a full-time job, being employed, you have that security. Taking that step into being self-employed and starting your own company, maybe not.
It was a strange, yeah, absolutely. No, definitely not. No, I think we're early days really in the life of xydrobe, and I think I made that decision because I had been, like I said, lucky enough to save up enough money for me to get me a certain way there, but also enable me to convince some people to provide us some level of funding. And it was only when we'd made that decision and we'd said, right, we have enough runway for X amount of months because we have an idea, we've spoken to some people about it, they're very into it as well. We'd won our first client at that point. And so we're able to get at least a small amount of funding, at least at the beginning, that allowed us all to quit our jobs, pay ourselves a very, very small amount, but still pay ourselves. And I think, yeah, financial security for me was a big motivator, at least throughout my career. But I think I also noticed that the way that I was going to get there was by taking a bigger risk. For me, it was, yes, I could continue working in my career and maybe by the time I'm 55 reach the level that I hope to be. Or I can take a risk. I can bet on myself with some funds that I'd had from working, and make sure that that was something that potentially I could achieve slightly quicker, and more so. So I think it was a lot about betting on ourselves and saying, right, I think we want to take the risk and we're up for a bit of an adventure.
And I mean, some of the clients that you've worked with already, and you've mentioned it's only really been a short amount of time, but you've worked with Givenchy and there's also obviously the very famous Harry Styles Cardigan, which we will go into a bit more detail on that one because that is a really interesting story. I mean, how, as this didn't exist before, you noticed a gap in the market. How did you sell this to your clients and be like, you need this? Why aren't you even using it? How did you make sense?
I think it was less about selling. It was more about learning from their side of things what was going on. And I think that was the biggest tool that we had, was the ability for us to get in the room in the first place. That was down to my two co-founders being very credible already in the industry. So we had a sort of language there that already existed by just them being people who were sort of in the ether. And from getting in the room, we actually didn't start out trying to sell a product. We started out trying to learn about what it is that they're doing at the moment, and more approaching it from a fact-finding mission and saying, look, we have this particular skill set, but we're more interested in learning about what you've been doing so far and what it is that is a struggle for you at the moment, and potentially is there something in here that could provide a really brilliant solution. And I also think that there was a huge amount of respect, that we made sure that we were approaching these brands with the same level of respect that they are used to being dealt with, because whilst we were providing a new service, sort of a new service to them, it was a lot more about, they already have a very strict, I think fashion is one of those industries that has such a phenomenally kind of rigid timeline in their year. They have shows that dictate pretty much everything. And so slotting into those time periods, making sure that we were coming to them at the right moment, talking to them about something in particular. And it was quite a kind of softly game that we played, of just making sure that we were firstly creating a really strong trusted relationship with each of the brands that we started talking to, but then also not trying to push a product that we didn't even know was going to solve a problem that they had or didn't have. And so the solutions that we were trying to provide them was more, because VFX in general is such a kind of generic and multifaceted term. It can apply to so many different things. That we knew that a solution would exist out there, and we knew that a quality level that wasn't being hit currently was possible. And so it was about then going, right, so what do we want to apply that to? And it was then listening to them and saying, right, okay, well, actually we have this, which could mean you could story tell like this. And it was actually a really creative process rather than a very kind of technical solution, just kind of going, it will get you X amount more returns on this product, for example. It was much more kind of, we can expand your creative vision in a way that you didn't realize was actually possible, which then put us into a slightly different realm with them, because we had the opportunity to then start talking to their digital teams and even their creative directors at points, especially with the likes of Givenchy. We're very, very lucky to have that opportunity. And so, yeah, that's where we ultimately landed in terms of a sales point of view. But again, even now, I wouldn't say that we particularly do a sales pitch. We always approach it from the standpoint of learning and listening to our clients first.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I think it's and similarities with the Hollywood TV film side is that the importance of storytelling, not just creating something for a specific purpose. It is telling a story. It's immersing either the viewer or the potential buyer or whatever it is into that world. And I was going to ask, did you work with creative directors on this? Because it is still, even though it may be for a certain purpose, it is still massively, you know, everything's very visual. Fashion, of course, it is. But so,
Gotcha. No, the creative director was and is, they are the director. If we're going to apply a direct kind of correlation between that and film, they are the director. They are the ultimate kind of final signing off point. But they're also very involved in the process. And because we were producing creative work, ultimately, we were having to go through our creative directors from the brands that we're working with. And that was a fascinating process, actually, because this is generally brand new for them, in the same way that it is for a lot of people who haven't been working in the industry in visual effects. The kind of intricacies of what happens behind the scenes is something that is very obvious to the thousands of people that do it. But then outside of the industry, it's this kind of mystery cloaked kind of wizardry that seems to happen, that has been something that we've prided ourselves on, I guess, was the ability of sort of bringing some of that information to this industry and the creative directors that we're working with, so they had a level of understanding about what it is we're doing, rather than just kind of saying, here it is, this final product done.
So how, in terms of how xydrobe's company works, and so you get given a brief, or you're talking with your client, and then you have to create this product or this virtualization. How are you crewing up yourselves? Are you working? Who are you collaborating with? How does that?
Yeah, so we've
work side.
Yeah, we've got a kind of amazing roster of artists. Firstly, so we have some brilliant people, that some people I've worked with previously in my previous life, and then others I would be put in contact with because, you know, the likes of ILM have very disparate offices all around the world. And one of the artists in particular that actually did the work for Givenchy and JW Anderson, did a large majority of it, is a guy called Jesus, who I know his post for JW Anderson was why we got talking in the first place, which was great. And we have this amazing roster, and then we ultimately have some third-party vendors which are fantastic as well, who help us with things like AR and things that we might not be able to do in-house. So it's more about the way we generally like to work is we take the brief in, we deal with the creative brief from a consultation point of view, very much within the core team. So I will generally be there, as well as our chief branding officer, Izzy, and then our producer. And then we'll start filtering out what the creative work is going to be, thinking about which art it is that's going to be right for the project. And it just so happened that the Givenchy job that we did straight after J.W. Anderson was also a knitted piece. So it did make sense for Jesus, who is an absolutely phenomenal Houdini artist, to help us out on that too. And so that's generally how we work. I think in the future, we're going to be building out our kind of permanent workforce to be one that we can house a lot of people, because I think one of the beauties of lockdown, obviously it made remote working really, really easy for a lot of us. And I think that's one of the really fantastic things about GridMarkets. And so I think we'll continue that, and we'll continue to have a remote workforce. But I think we're really interested in building out, especially with the product that annoyingly I can't talk about today. But we are building out a really fantastic kind of permanent in-house team that we want to hold kind of the xydrobe values and all of that good stuff within it too.
No, that's great. I mean, that's all part of the business as well, isn't it? It's the team and that work ethic.
Absolutely.
And all the values. But from one project you can't talk about, let's talk about a project you can talk about, which is the Harry Styles sweater, Cardigan.
Yeah.
So that hit the papers all over the place. It did good, amazing press for you guys.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and the background behind?
Yeah. So it was a really amazing project, actually, because J.W. Anderson, for those who know of the brand, it's head up by someone called Jonathan Anderson, who is also the creative director of a really fantastic brand called Loewe. He is probably one of the most kind of creatively admired creative directors in the industry at the moment. He has a phenomenal kind of sense of communication with any of the work that he does. So firstly, yes, J.W. Anderson, working with them was fantastic. And then the immediate idea for us to work and help them was the fact that they wanted to do basically a swan song for the Harry Styles cardigan. And that Harry Styles cardigan was this very interesting piece because basically it's so bizarre that it went so mad, but it did. And Harry Styles wore this cardigan whilst he was rehearsing for Good Morning America. This was a few years ago in the pandemic. It's a fantastic cardigan. TikTok caught wind of it, and it became a bit of a trend to try and recreate this cardigan because J.W. Anderson's cardigan was actually sold out by the time that this had gone viral. And so what J.W. Anderson did was actually release the knitwear pattern for free. And so it ended up just blowing up. And, I think it was shared over 2 million times or something on TikTok. And it became something that exists even to this day. And so they really, really wanted to do this really special swan song to the cardigan, which ultimately meant that we wanted to recreate it virtually, completely perfectly as a 3D representation of itself, that we would sell as an NFT that would one day be virtually wearable. So the whole kind of idea of it was that we would create this 3D rendering of it. This was pre-rendered, again, using GridMarkets. And then ultimately in the future, as we continue on this kind of evolution of virtual context, that I think however long it's going to take for a luxury consumer to start entering into that kind of Web3 era, potentially with their own avatar, then the owner of that NFT would be able to come back to us and say, right, I want it as an Unreal file, or I want it as a Unity file, and we would be able to update it for them and provide it to them. It was a really fascinating project from the get-go. Firstly, we had, I think we had 6 weeks to create the cardigan, and we had 13 days to market it, which if you know anything about NFTs, it's not long enough. You need generally like sometimes years. But we were really, really, again, this kind of speaks to the whole opportunity side of things. We were just like, we've got to do this. This is so fun and so exciting. It's such an adventure that we worked directly with J.W. Anderson, and they provided us with the knitwear pattern itself, as well as they sent us the sample the one sample that they had, because the Harry Styles cardigan was actually put into the V&A, which is phenomenal. That happened basically right around the time we were doing it. And so we got the cardigan. We had 2 artists working on it full time, as well as we had brilliant early stage modeler who built out the base mesh, and then that got passed over to Jesus. And then also a brilliant lighting and CG suit called Sebastian, who took it and turned it into this absolutely phenomenal piece of work, actually, and that took about 6 weeks. And it was so perfect that when we actually released images to the press, nobody realized it was a CG piece, which was Michael's hardest task, actually, was convincing everyone that this was digital, it wasn't real. And then it was sort of seeing the cogs click about what this actually means. It's then possible for fashion. Because even in film, it's quite rare to recreate something like this as perfectly as we did, because generally, you know, whether that's through IP laws or infringement or anything like that, and being that close up to an asset is quite rare, especially a piece of clothing. So it was really, really a phenomenal thing to work on. And I'm still very, very proud of the work that we did. And I think, Jonathan Anderson himself was obviously brilliant, and the knitwear designer who created it with him. They both came to see it. We held this kind of amazing private viewing day for the JW Anderson team, which was fantastic. And it was fantastic, actually, because we ended up selling that NFT, and all of the proceeds went to an amazing charity called AKT. And it ended up selling for 4 times its IRL value, which is amazing. And we're very, very proud.
I mean, again, I'm going to use the word innovative, that it can be overused, but so you've got the initial thing of seeing the gap in the market with just fashion houses being able to visually tell and sell their products better and in a more, I guess, with in a higher quality way. But then you bring in the NFTs, which, I mean, to be honest, I still haven't really got my head around it, as I'm sure quite a few people are. I mean, is that something you see as the future now for fashion in particular? Is that your area?
I do. I do see it as something that's going to provide a really valuable tool. I think the easiest way I always describe and have described NFTs, where I think it's going to have the most brilliant crossover with fashion, is when you're able to actually then authenticate real world items on the blockchain, and providing some kind of virtual twinning, digital twinning of a physical, tangible piece. I think that's when we're going to start to see something really interesting. But I do think we're going to need to get to a point where virtual context is gained, because, you know, the large majority, and I mean, I'm talking, 98% of luxury consumers are not NFT native, they're not VR native yet. So getting them into that category of people that either A, have an avatar that they're interested in dressing, or B, even understand virtual ownership, or C, even own cryptocurrency in the first place, which I know there are some solutions out there at the moment that are brilliant for people who only own fiat. I think that NFTs are going to play a really important role in authenticating items that you want to put on your avatar, as well as real world vintage items as well. That's already being tackled by a really brilliant company. And I think that there was so much kind of preconception about NFTs when we started doing it and started talking to brands about it, because yes, we're providing visual effects. We're also really interested in the Web3 kind of space, and what visual effects meant for a lot of those brands was entering into Web3 in some shape or form. And the NFT question was very, very, I guess, stigmatized, because there was so much press around it at that time. And there was a very distinct style in the NFTs that we were sort of equating with what an NFT is, when really it's just a brilliant piece of technology to authenticate something digital. It doesn't need to mean that you have to sell a cartoon. But that was a lot of that kind of disconnect for them was figuring out how they were going to do this. And it presented a really interesting opportunity to provide fantastic visual effects, really brilliant CG work, supplemented with the ability for a brand like JW Anderson, which is fascinating as well. And I know this is super boring, and I'm not going to get into it, but there was so much interesting stuff around legal R&D, as well as KYC and AML. So learning how we were going to take a decentralized asset and apply it into a very centralized accounting system, for example. That was something that had never been done before. And we had to do it in the space of 6 weeks. And testament to the JW Anderson team, I think we went through about 50 iterations of our contract. I think we worked out, into 80 iterations of how we were ultimately gonna approach how they were going to ingest funds, how we were going to ingest the funds into the charity, from this decentralized asset, which at the very base of it, it's pinned up by the fact that it's all anonymous. So centralized finance is not set up to accept any of those kinds of currency exchanges. So there was a lot of that stuff, but like I said, I'm not going to go into it because it's pretty boring. But it was a fascinating process from the start. And I think NFTs, whilst I think we're going to get there, is what I'm trying to say. I think we're going to go through a bit of an evolution with virtual VR-based commerce, VR-based experience within luxury goods. We're going to see, I know the likes of Meta and whatever Apple are going to be doing, but they're selling their Oculus at a heavy loss at the moment, just with the idea that we want to saturate the market as much as possible to get as many people owning a VR headset. And I think once we get to the point where we are able to reframe VR and get to the point where luxury consumers are actually engaging with it in a compelling and enthusiastic way about, it's actually adding value to their lives, outside of gaming, then I think we're going to see a really interesting influx of NFT-based products that are going to make a huge amount of sense.
And I mean, I'm kind of sliding us into question time, because I do have a question that is relevant to this, and I think you probably actually answered. But the question is, what's next for xydrobe? Are you still producing NFTs? Is that? Yes,
in theory we are, but we are focused on something really, really exciting that speaks to, I can't talk about it specifically, really frustratingly. I
won't goad you. I won't try and trip you up.
No, but it speaks to that virtual side of commerce, I guess. I think I can say that. It's much more about trying to engage a luxury consumer in something that is actively going towards the point where we could potentially call it a Web3 type era. I think it's something that if we can develop a virtual space, a virtual world, that brands can actively engage in a way that makes sense for them, that isn't a gamified environment, it's not a heavily stylized environment that already exists. And yes, there are really fantastic spaces that have huge amounts of consumers, millions, hundreds of millions sometimes of consumers. Then I think we're going to be into a really interesting space where we would love to then integrate an NFT product that is, obviously purchasable with fiat. It includes virtual twinning, so you buy in tandem with a tangible item even. So yes, in short, yes, we would definitely like to continue working on NFTs. I think there's a huge amount of really compelling reasoning behind visual effects artists getting into something like NFTs, especially for luxury fashion, because there's so much use case for it. We've just got to get to that point where we can make a really scalable and brilliant business behind it.
Yeah, and I suppose it's as your roster of clients grows and you go on, it's learning what's best for those clients and how they can most tell the most compelling story visually through their products, and whether that's
Absolutely.
right or whether it's something else.
Absolutely.
So we've got another question. It says, so it sounds like you've worked inside some of the film industry's biggest movie franchises, as we've named some, Star Wars, not very well known, and Ready Player One.
Really niche cult film, yeah.
yeah. But you decided to invest into providing VFX within fashion. Have you seen the fashion industry start to produce more Hollywood standard VFX in recent times?
Yes, I have actually. I think there's a really interesting uptake of some visual effects vendors. And I mean, it's not uncommon for brands to use visual effects vendors like, Framestore have an entire advertising department.
Hell, yeah.
Yeah, the Mill, for example, exactly. And a really fantastic company I also worked for called Untold, which are directly working within advertising agencies, creative agencies. And so I have, and whilst I say, this is what, 7, 8 months into our lifespan. Yes, I've seen an interesting shift in digital work being used more often, especially within brands like Givenchy is a really exciting and interesting example because they were, as a brand, very kind of interested in pushing the boundaries of what was used to being seen and how they were going to product story tell whatever they were pushing out there. And I think that digital work was something that they were very quick to understand was something that was going to make it a lot easier to do that than doing real captured footage. So yes and no. I mean, like I said, this is very early days and it's already been a slight shift in the space of not very long. So yeah.
And so the final question that I've got from the audience is, and it kind of touched on what we were talking about with you wanting to grow, I guess, that network or community of artists, as well as building your own team that come into the office. But are you looking specifically at artists that have worked in fashion, that have that understanding of nuances, or from, as you said, you worked with, was it Jesus? You've worked with him prior at the VFX company. So are you open to the whole remit of VFX artists?
Definitely. Definitely. I think I've tended to always look to people who've worked in the visual effects industry because for the last 30 years, it's been where most of the know-how has lived. In fact, all of the know-how has lived pretty much. And so I am really looking to people who have an understanding of pieces of software that we use generally inside the film industry because they lend themselves to producing really brilliant photorealistic work. I mean, that's what the entire visual effects industry in film and TV has been underpinned by is meshing a CG item into a real world plate. So taking that kind of experience and knowledge base has been something that I have been prioritizing. That being said, I know there is this huge influx of interest around digital creation within, younger generations, and that's not going to look exactly like we've always seen it in the visual effects industry. So I am always open and interested talking to people who have potentially never worked in the visual effects industry, but they have learned that they're actually really brilliant in Maya, or they're actually really brilliant as an editor and they've been working within Blender. And, there's always going to be some kind of interesting piece to the puzzle that we're trying to create. But yes, having really brilliant senior artists like Jesus around who are fantastic at pieces of quite, I guess, I'm not sure whether I can call it niche anymore, but Houdini in particular, to guide potentially some of those younger artists into learning these really brilliant tools is going to be also really important.
Yeah, well, the intricacy, and we know CFX artists and working on the cloth,
yes,
and the fabrics, that's a very I'd say it's a very, whether it's niche or it's a very highly skilled work job. And finding good CFX artists, it's hard. So once you've got them, onto them. Before we wrap up, I guess the last question is, in 3 succinct words, if you could offer any advice or 3 succinct points.
3 words. Okay, yeah. You can do 3 words. Yeah.
Do 3 words that or qualities that you need to just go after and achieve your ambitions, I suppose.
Okay, 3 points I can do. I'm not sure I can do it in 3 words. Point number 1 would be, don't feel emotionally burdened to the company that you might be working for. It's something I always say to people who might be asking me advice about their career is ultimately a job is a job. You're there to do it. And if you feel you've outgrown your abilities to do that job and you want to go elsewhere, and that company that you're currently working for isn't able to provide you that opportunity, and there is another company that is, do it. That's always the way that I've approached my career. Is I was approached a lot throughout my career, and I always said yes. And it meant that I was able to level up my skill set in a way that was probably quicker. And I think there's always benefits to staying in a company. But I would say that from my own personal experience, it was something that meant that I was able to have a really, really varied skill set very quickly. The next thing is trust yourself. I think that there's a lot of fear mongering, especially within women, about setting up your own company. You're often kind of, I guess, questioned a lot more than your male counterparts about whether maybe you're not skilled enough. Are you sure? There's a lot of this stuff that I think there's a very big rhetoric around women setting up their own company. And I think the biggest thing I can say to a woman is trust yourself and also take the risk, because you can do it. The next thing, if I have a third point, would probably be make sure you're talking to your peers. I think that's a really big one as well. Within wherever you are, talk to your peers openly about the place that they're in themselves. If they are of a similar point as you, as a colleague, then I think one of the biggest kind of misgivings about working for a really large corporate company is there's this big culture around not openly discussing things like salary or promotions, and it only goes to serve a larger company. It doesn't serve an employee. And I do think that it's really important to do that, because then you'll start learning much more about your own financial goals and how you're going to get there, and potentially that the company you're currently working for isn't actually going to get you to that point. So you can save a lot of time and potentially find somewhere else that could do. So that's it. 3 points.
They're 3 very, very good points. Thanks so much, Nell. Mark, do you have anything to add to this great session?
Well, it was a great session, Nell, and thank you for making time. Your career is quite amazing, and would love to stay abreast of it. So when some of those things that you talked about that were difficult to talk about, you can talk about them. Let's get back together again. I did have one question for you. You talked about embracing the artist community and looking for talent and recruiting talent. If talent is out there and is interested in learning more about what you're doing, and perhaps even joining up with you, how would they reach out to you? How do they connect with you?
Yes, I think the easiest thing to do is to email hello@xydrobe.com. Just send us an email, send us a note. We are based in London, in East London, and we're always around and up for coffee. I'm a big caffeine addict, so I will always be up for having a chat over a coffee, whether or not that's with the intention to potentially get a job, whether or not it's just for some advice. I am very, very much open to it. So yeah, please do email hello@xydrobe. I'm always on the lookout for really brilliant artists and talent. So yeah, please do.
Great, thank you. Well, that's really good to hear. As we know, relationships are the most important thing in this industry.
Absolutely.
So great. Okay. I think we are ready to wrap this thing up. Oh, look, and there is the much spoken about cardigan. You can see it's so popular. Look at that.
Yes.
I have no idea that is easy. You should be. It looks incredible. Really does. Gonna go buy it myself if I can, but digitally. I promised the promo code for GridMarkets 2022 July 19 webinar is on your screen right now, so please do take a note of it, or go back to gridmarkets.com/webinars, where you can rewatch this or share it with your friends and scroll through and get this webinar code yet again. Our next webinar is 27th of September. And we are talking to Matt Pachula. Matt is technical director at Naughty Dog. He is both a Houdini artist and a technologist. In this webinar, we will be covering his career and his technical work in developing the Houdini solver axiom used to make the simulation and which GridMarkets supports. See our gridmarkets.com/webinars page for more information on when and where, where it's going to be online, but what time it's going to be if you want to check in live. And also look back at all our other great webinars that have taken place throughout the last few months. So thank you very much, Nell. It's been great chatting to you, and I can't wait to meet up in London when it's not so hot.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No worries. And thank you, Mark, for yet again bringing this all together. It's been great.
Pleasure. Thank you both. It was great.
All right. Thanks. Have a good evening, everyone, or morning. Bye-bye.
See you later.